They say the Cold War ended decades ago, but for some men, it never really did. Find out what happened when curiosity pulls one of those men back to a place the government swore was sealed forever, and what happens when he learns that not everything down there stayed dead. This story comes from a retired U.S. Air Force guard who went back to where he should have never returned, Site 19B, deep under the Nevada test range. He says the old experiments didn't stop, they just adapted. Welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and become part of our ever-growing community of the curious. My name is Mark. I'm 68 years old and live in a small trailer outside Pahrump, Nevada. I served in the United States Air Force from 1978 to 1989. Most of my service was security detail at a classified site south of Mercury. We called it Site 19B back then. The paperwork said it was part of environmental testing, but that wasn't true. I have stayed quiet for most of my life. We were warned to. Lately, the dreams won't stop, and I keep hearing noises under the desert. In 1983, I was posted on perimeter rotation. The base sat inside a dry valley about 15 miles from the main Nevada test site gates. Everything important was underground. They used an old missile silo network and extended it another 4 levels down. The top 2 levels were offices, power, and air systems. The lower ones were where the scientists worked. We weren't allowed past level 3 without an escort. Most of our job was simple: badge checks, armed escort, routine patrols. But strange things kept happening. Supply trucks came in at night loaded with medical crates. Civilian contractors never stayed long. Every time a new batch of personnel arrived, the old ones disappeared without a word. Sometimes we heard crying through the vents late at night. Not loud, just steady, like someone trying not to scream. When we asked, the officers said it was audio from stress response tests being played back for calibration. But we knew better. They called them participants. Officially, it was about radiation resistance. We were told they volunteered from military prisons or long-term hospitals. One night in early '84, they needed extra hands moving specimens. I drew the short straw. We carried stretchers down a hallway marked biocontainment. The air was cold and smelled like disinfectant and copper. On the stretchers were men. At least they had started that way. Some were missing hair and fingernails. The skin had gone pale gray and rough, like scar tissue over their whole bodies. Their eyes didn't focus. One man kept saying, "It hurts to think," over and over. We were told not to talk to them. A doctor with no name tag said they were adjusting to new cellular grafts and that speech patterns would fade soon. After that, I stopped asking questions. By mid-1985, there were fewer guards and more lockdowns. The lower elevators stayed locked on red lights. Rumor was they'd added something new, cell cultures from a crash recovery up north. After that, strange things began showing up on our maintenance logs. Temperature spikes, unauthorized door cycling, short power surges. One day, the intercoms glitched, and we heard human voices talking backwards for a full minute. Then, everything went quiet. When they finally let a few of us down to level 4 to fix a broken camera, I saw what they were hiding. There were rows of containment rooms. Each had a thick window and a red light over the door. Inside were people strapped upright. Some still breathed on their own. Others had tubes running into their chests. Their limbs looked swollen and stiff, like the bones inside were wrong. A man in a lab coat told us to keep moving. I asked if they were alive. He said, "They're adapting." That word stuck with me. Late summer '86, we got alarms, containment breach on level 4. They sealed every hatch. We were ordered to guard the elevator and shoot anything that came up without an escort badge. Hours later, something hit the steel from the other side hard enough to bend it. The sound was wet, like meat against metal. Then we heard a voice through the door. It said, "Open, please." The commander didn't. He called for backup. The banging stopped after about 10 minutes. When the scientists finally came up, they looked like ghosts. One of them vomited in the hallway. We were told radiation release, nothing biological. They closed the lower levels after that and told us to forget it. 2 weeks later, the site was decommissioned. Everyone signed papers, and we went home. For years, I tried not to think about it. Then last spring, a younger guy named Ryan told me about an old air vent he'd found near White Rock Spring Road while mapping fault lines. Said it went deep and still had a ladder. I knew exactly what he'd found. I waited until the weather cooled and drove out there with a flashlight, rope, and my old sidearm. The desert was empty. The vent sat half buried under gravel. The grate was rusted through. I climbed down. The shaft went about 30 feet before turning sideways. I crawled through until I reached a metal hatch. The wheel lock moved after some effort, and a cold draft came out. Everything smelled the same as I remembered, chemical and dust. I just want to take a moment to say thank you for being part of Weird Encounters. As of recently, my videos aren't being shared, so if you're enjoying this story or the channel, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It really helps others discover these stories and keeps this channel alive. Now, let's get back to the story. The hallways were coated with gray powder. My footprints were the only ones. Old warning signs still hung crooked. They said Biotest A, Feed Area, and Med Supply. A low electrical hum came from somewhere below. It wasn't loud, but steady, like backup power still running. I passed a storage room with metal cages. Inside were old feeding trays, plastic tubes, and a small pile of bones that looked human. The skulls were longer in back than normal. Some had drilled holes. Another room had walls lined with dried stains and hooks. There were restraints built into the floor. I remembered hearing once that they tied them down when seizures started. I realized the place hadn't been cleaned when they left. It had just been locked. I found the stairwell to level 4 still intact. The door had rust but wasn't locked. The smell got worse the further I went down. It was thick and sour, like spoiled food and cleaning chemicals mixed. The floor down there was wet. My flashlight showed dark puddles with a faint shine. There were signs on the walls that said Containment A, Containment B, and Observation Wing. Some of the lights still worked. Dim red bulbs blinked in a pattern, one long, two short. The same signal we used to see during containment cycles. I followed the corridor until I came to a security station. The glass was broken and the console lights were still on. A clipboard sat on the counter. The last entry was dated July 18th, 1986. It read, Transfer complete. Subjects 12, A to 12F, unresponsive, but vital signs detected. Behavioral recognition remains. Awaiting clearance for termination. Someone had crossed out termination and written suspension. There was a key card on the floor, so I took it and tried it on the door marked Containment A. It worked. The room was large with 6 cells. The smell inside was so strong it burned my nose. My light shook while I walked. In the first cell, a figure hung by its wrists. The skin looked hard, almost like plastic, but parts of it were still soft and wet. The head was turned toward the wall. When my light hit it, the eyes opened. They were gray and cloudy. It didn't speak at first. It just watched me. Then it said, very quiet, "You stayed." The voice was broken and deep. I froze. Another cell held something worse. The body had grown too long. The arms reached the floor. The ribs stuck out like pipes. When it breathed, the chest moved sideways. It dragged itself toward the window and hit the glass with its forehead again and again. The sound was hollow. Each time it hit, it whispered something under its breath. I couldn't tell what. Maybe numbers. The next 2 cells were empty except for black residue on the walls. The last one had a single cot with belts and chains. There were fingernails stuck in the leather straps. The control room beside the cells had a box of old tapes. Most had dates written on them. I played one in a small recorder still plugged in. The tape hissed, but a man's voice came through. He said, "Subject 12 shows continued survival without food. Auditory response positive. Recognition of names confirmed." Another voice asked, "Is it stable?" The first man answered, "No. It keeps trying to speak, but it's not language anymore." Then there was a sound I can't forget, something hitting metal over and over, then the tape stopped. Another folder on the desk said, "Stage 5 cellular drift." There were pictures inside, humans with their faces swollen, eyes grown shut, skin thick and gray. Some looked half melted. The notes said the grafted cells wouldn't die. When organs failed, new tissue grew out of the old. The bodies changed shape, trying to stay alive. One page said, "Subjects show preference for low light and moisture. Recognize handlers by smell. Attempt to follow speech commands. Violence increases when ignored." I think that was when I realized they weren't just dead experiments left behind. They were kept alive on purpose. While I was reading, the power flickered. I heard a thump from the hallway, then another. The lights on the console started blinking faster. Somewhere further down the hall, something metal scraped against the floor. I shut off my flashlight and waited. The sound kept coming, slow steps, not rushed. It stopped outside the door. I could hear breathing through the crack. The breathing was wet and heavy. Then a single word came through. "Open." I didn't move. The handle rattled once, then stopped. I waited maybe 5 minutes before I dared to move again. When I opened the door, the hall was empty except for a wet footprint that trailed toward the stairwell. I followed the trail against every bit of sense I had. It led to a wide room with tanks along the walls. Some still held liquid. Floating in one was what looked like parts of people, arms, legs, heads, all mixed together like they'd grown from one body. There was movement inside the liquid, slow, like breathing. The bubbles rose every few seconds. A long table held metal trays with dried material still stuck to them. Each had a tag, tissue sample, neural graft, stage 3 remains. At the back of the room was a large metal door with warning signs. The air coming from underneath was colder than anywhere else. On the door, someone had written with a marker, "Don't wake them." The handwriting looked shaky and smeared. I turned around and started heading back the way I came. I didn't make it far. A loud bang echoed behind me, and the lights went out completely. I pulled my flashlight up, but the beam flickered. Something moved across the hall. I caught a glimpse, a tall shape crawling on its hands and feet, joints bending wrong. It stopped when the light hit it. The face was human but stretched, the mouth open too wide. It said, "Mark." Hearing my name made my stomach drop. I never used my name in any log or badge. Somehow it knew. It started walking toward me slow, shoulders twitching, head tilted. I raised my gun and fired once. The sound was deafening in that small space. It fell backward, but didn't stop moving. I ran. The whole place came alive with sounds. Doors clanging, metal scraping, voices whispering words I couldn't make out. Some were crying, some were laughing. I found the vent shaft and started climbing. Halfway up the ladder, I felt something grab my boot. The hand was cold and strong. I kicked until it let go. When I looked down, I saw eyes staring up at me through the dark. They blinked in different rhythms, like they weren't connected to the same mind. I climbed faster until I hit the grate. The bolts were rusted, but I forced them loose. The air outside was hot and dry. I pulled myself out and rolled onto the ground. The vent below me hissed once, like a long breath, then went quiet. The sun was just coming up. I got to my Jeep and drove until I hit the highway. For 3 days, I stayed inside my trailer with the blinds closed. Every sound outside made me jump. Then I drove back out there to see if the vent was still open. It wasn't. Fresh concrete had been poured. A new DOE marker stood on top with a date tag from 2 days before. There were tire marks in the dirt. That night, a black SUV parked across from my place for 2 hours with the lights off. It left at sunrise. I know what that means. They never shut it down. They just sealed it again. Out there, in the heat haze beyond Dugway Proving Ground, something still moves when the wind dies. In this story, a former resident describes how fallout destroyed a trailer park, livestock died, and families vanished after government relocation. Decades later, sightings of pale, hairless figures still haunt Skull Valley. My name's Don McCready, and I've lived my whole life between Tooele and Rush Valley. I'm 61 now, retired from the county road department. Folks around here know me as the guy who still hauls water for the horses out by the old feedlot. I never planned on writing something like this, but your channel made me realize other people have seen strange things they can't explain. What I'm going to tell you happened a long time ago, but it still wakes me up most nights. Back then, I was renting a trailer on the south side of Skull Valley, about 20 minutes from the Dugway Proving Ground main gate. There was a small trailer park called Silver Springs Court, a half circle of maybe 20 old units, families who worked odd jobs, retirees, and one family named the Rourkes. They ran a few goats, chickens, and had 2 kids, Eli and Trish. We used to sit outside at night watching the red warning lights blink on the horizon. The Army tested all sorts of things out there. Sometimes we heard low booms or saw green flashes that turned the whole valley strange for a second. Everyone joked about it. Government fireworks. Nobody thought much of it. We were used to weird. Then one morning, every goat the Rourkes owned lay dead behind the wire fence. No wounds, just stiff, foam around the mouths. Same week, a neighbor's dog went blind. By the end of that month, the Rourkes' chickens had stopped laying, and the grass around their pen turned the color of rust. A few men in white coveralls and respirators showed up 2 days later. No insignia, just white trucks. They took soil samples, loaded the dead animals, and told us to stay indoors. When someone asked who they worked for, one of them said, "Environmental Response Unit. Nothing to worry about." But we noticed something. They wore radiation badges clipped to their suits. That wasn't nothing. Within a week, the Rourkes packed what they could and left, supposedly relocated to temporary housing in Tooele by state assistance. Only when I drove into town a month later, I couldn't find any record of them. No forwarding address. Their lot sat empty, doors still swinging in the wind. By late summer, nights got noisier. Coyotes mostly, but sometimes it didn't sound right. Longer, rougher. A sound that started like a scream but dropped low at the end, almost human. The dogs would hide under the steps. My buddy Walt said he saw shapes moving beyond the fence line one evening, too big for deer, walking wrong, hunched and fast. People started spreading stories in town. Ranchers said cattle were being found torn open but not eaten. Only organs missing. Sheriff's office blamed cults. The Army said nothing. One night I was hauling water past the old Rourke lot when I saw movement by the shed. I called out, thinking maybe someone had broken in. What came out of that shadow wasn't right. It looked like a person but too thin, skin pale like candle wax. It moved quick, head twitching side to side, then bolted across the road and into the brush. I'll never forget the sound, bare feet slapping gravel. I called Walt the next day. He just said, "Don, you saw one of them." Walt had worked briefly inside Dugway in the maintenance division. He said after the goat deaths, there was an incident during a containment test. Something about a wind shift, chemical release. He never learned details. The next week, certain relocated families were supposedly brought back inside the restricted zone for medical observation. He heard they were housed in old prefab units along an abandoned range road and told they'd be compensated. After that, no one saw them again. He swore that once, while delivering parts, he saw figures behind a chain-link fence. People, but hairless, blistered, their faces pulled tight. 2 hunters from Stockton disappeared near Lookout Pass. Their truck was found locked, rifles inside, no tracks leading away. Same season, a woman broke down on Route 199 and said a man came out of the desert and tried to flag her down. Only when he got close, she saw his jaw didn't move right, like it was fused. State police closed the case as lost hikers. Locals started calling them the Burned. Some said they were survivors of secret radiation tests. Others said they were still being studied. It was August when I saw them up close. I'd been helping a rancher fix a water line south of the range. We finished late, sun already gone behind the ridge. The truck battery died, so I decided to walk the mile to the highway. The moon was out, enough light to see the dirt road. About halfway, I heard footsteps behind me, soft, dragging. Thought it might be Walt playing around. I called out, "That you?" Nothing. Then I smelled something, like metal and rot. When I turned, 2 shapes stood in the road. Human height, maybe a little taller. They didn't have hair, just smooth grayish skin with dark seams down the arms. The eyes caught the moonlight, white, no pupils. One of them twitched, shoulders jerking like a puppet. The other raised a hand, and that's when I saw it had 6 fingers, each ending in dark, cracked nails. I froze. The smaller one made a choking sound, like trying to speak, but no air came. Then they moved, fast. I bolted into the sagebrush, fell once, cut my hand on a rock, kept going until I reached the fence line by the highway. I remember turning and seeing them stop at the edge of the brush, heads tilted, watching me. Then they just sank back into the dark. The highway patrol found me walking at dawn, shoes shredded. They said I must have panicked and imagined it, but they couldn't explain the deep burns on my hand or why my watch had stopped at 10:42 p.m. Within weeks, men from the base came through again, white trucks, respirators. They bulldozed Silver Springs Court, said it was contaminated ground. Everyone who still lived there got vouchers to move to Grantsville. Most took them. Walt didn't. He drank himself to death the next year. When the demolition crews were done, they put up new fencing, double high, posted with federal property. Do not enter. You can still see the gate from Route 199, and at night, there are faint lights like flash lamps moving slow back and forth. Last I heard, a geological study called the soil unstable, but locals know better. We still find animal carcasses by the wash, no footprints, just drag marks. I kept quiet because I figured no one would believe an old road worker. Then last month, my nephew sent me a photo he took while camping near Dell, a blurred figure by the ridge, tall, thin, bent at the waist. He thought it was a trick of light until he showed it to me. I knew that outline. Same shape I saw that night. Maybe they never left. Maybe they can't. If you ever come through Skull Valley, you'll pass an unmarked road with a rusted stop sign and a line of old cottonwoods. The air smells different there, like metal and something sickly sweet. That's where Silver Springs Court used to be. Just remember that some things in Utah aren't myths, they are real. And so, another strange encounter fades away. A trick of the mind, or something far more unsettling. That's for you to decide. Thank you so much for watching my stories. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support is what keeps this channel going.